This is what we're making. A very thick wall, step bezel, and you want your cabochon to fit pretty snugly because then it'll be easy to set. Now this is going to be the basis for a decorative bezel. You can either set stones in it, you could use bead setting or gypsy setting, it's big enough, or you could just decorate it with file marks or saw marks or little stamps. But this is basically what we're making. And I'm using fine silver for the bezel. So I cast a 4mm high by 2mm wide fine silver ingot, and castings are notoriously brittle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this to length, make sure the ends are nice and flat, and then I'm going to anneal it before I form it. And you'd think coming out of a casting it would be annealed. It's partially annealed. It's not as soft as it would be if you annealed it again with the torch. I'll start by filing the end flat using my Swiss No. 2 cut flat hand file. Make sure it's square. You can check it against the side of your file, and it isn't quite square. That'll do. Now, the cabochon I'm using is 16mm diameter, and this is 2 millimeters thick, so 18 times 3.14 is 56.52, and that's the length of our bezel. And I just set my calipers exactly 56.52. Exactly. Tighten the screw on the side so it doesn't move. And what I do is I put my calipers on my bench peg so that they don't shift. Hold my metal against it. Drag the other jaw across, and I have this perfect mark that's exactly the size. So what I do is cut just to the right of it, being right-handed. And I'm actually cutting into the end of my peg just so that I don't have any slips. It holds the blade where you want it. And now I'll file this back to my mark, and it should be exact. And I'll have my calipers still set so that I can measure it. And it just slips in there, holds itself in place, so that's pretty perfect. So now I'll close the calipers, turn them off, save the battery, and at this point we will anneal. And when you're annealing, make sure that your soldering block that you're annealing on doesn't have any flux on it. That way it won't leave marks on the back of your metal. So we want a big neutral flame. We'll just bring this up to a dull red. Wait a couple of seconds for the red to go away, and then we'll quench in water. This is just to make sure that this casting doesn't crack when we're forming it. Lovely. If you shield it, you can see the dull red. Wait until you can't see the red. Then we'll quench it in water and dry it off. So we'll just dry it, and I'm going to form it with my flat half-round pliers. And because it's a casting, what we want is the best side of the metal to the outside. So don't grab the very end, leave the very end sticking out. If you grab it on the very end, you'll distort it. So what we want is just a nice oval shape. And because this is as thick as it is, take your time. If you're bending it and it quits bending, anneal it again, because we don't want it to crack. Keep a really close watch on it. Yeah, it's starting to feel a little bit tough, so what I'll do is anneal it again and then go ahead and bring these ends down. So you can see that as soon as I bring those down, it's going to be pretty close to correct. So I annealed it again, quenched it, dried it. So we don't have to pickle this. We can just quench it in water. It is still nice and bright metal. So we'll go back, half round on the inside, and we bring these ends down until they're level. And we want to make sure it's not twisted, that the ends are nice and even. And when it's as perfect as you can get it, then we'll solder it. So take your time, make it as nice as you can. So mix up your flux, make sure it's nice and creamy. And I'm just going to flux the join, top and bottom. Just want enough to keep the metal clean. And I'm using a 3mm long piece of hard solder. And I'll just perch it on top of the join. And dry out your flux, and once it's nice and crusty white, then you can go ahead and heat your metal. And what I'm doing is just heating from the bottom and brushing it back and forth, brushing the flame back and forth. And you can see how quickly the solder flowed. And that's all you need to do. Now, after you quench it, look on the inside, make sure the solder flowed all the way down. It should, because the solder normally goes towards the heat. Lovely. You can actually see where the solder came to the inside, and that's what we want. So now we'll pickle it to get the flux off, and we'll round it up. I'm just going to go on my ring mandrel, and it's thick, but it's fine silver, and it's fairly malleable, so I just pushed it down as far as I could with my fingers, and we're going to round it up with a rawhide hammer. Flip it over. Now you want to work this as little as possible, because it is fine silver and it'll stretch fairly easily. So just make sure you get it round and then leave it alone. And when I look at it, it's slightly potato chip shaped. So what I'll do is use my bench block. Put this on my bench block, and then I use another bench block and put it on top and then smack it. Now be careful with these, because oftentimes the edges are sharp, and if you're not paying attention, you'll cut yourself. Flip it over, give it another love tap. Check it, make sure it's nice and flat. Lovely. And now check your inside diameter just to make sure that what we did is correct. And this is slightly under 16, which is lovely, because now I can stretch it just a little bit just by hammering it on the ring mandrel, and it will make it the exact size. So this is 15.85. It won't take much to bring that up to the correct size. So great. Step one. So tidy up your bezel. I used a split mandrel with 400 grade wet or dry paper on the inside and 400 paper on a sanding stick on the outside. Now I want to tidy up the top and the bottom, and I'm just using a piece of paper on my bench, and you make sure that there are no lumps on the bench. Turn it. Some people do a figure 8 style, but because my fingers aren't working all that great, I just go back and forth. And when it's finished, you'll be able to see a nice, dull, clean line all the way around, so you can see this still needs a little bit and that still needs a little bit. So make it pretty and flat, top and bottom. Now my bezel is pretty much finished. It's nice and square and flat and round and a proper inside diameter. So I need a piece of 1 millimeter square wire to go on the inside on the bottom, making a step bezel. So I'm starting with 1.2 millimeter round, and I'm holding it in one of the old wooden ring clamps just to make it easier to file a long taper on the end. Hold it in your fingers if you wish, but it's just a lot easier. And these things are cheap. I think this one cost me $11. It's really handy. So a nice long taper on your wire because we need it tapered enough that we can put it in our draw plate and grab it when it goes through the other side. So this is that's a round one. So you can pretty much get any profile draw plate you want. We want square in this instance. So what I'm doing is just checking it to make sure that it will come through the draw plate enough to grab it to be able to pull it. So a little more of a taper. And oftentimes there are numbers on your draw plate, but it doesn't really mean anything other than that's the order to be able to pull it in. So now, a little bit of beeswax on the wire. As long as you lubricate it, it doesn't matter. Could even be olive oil. It's just so that it doesn't drag in the plate. So you can see I have the draw plate in my vise. Bring your calipers, because you need to keep a close eye on this. Make sure you don't go too small. If you go too small, then you get melted down and started again. I'm using draw tongs. You could use vice grips, self-locking pliers, but they don't grab as well as these. So what you do is you start with the bigger holes, go smaller until it won't go through, and then you pull. And then you pull in order, so don't skip any holes. And measure it. That's 1.06. So one more. And when you're drawing, try to get the full pull through without stopping. If you stop, it'll leave a little mark on it. .98. So close enough. And now we'll put all this away. Now I'm going to clip the end, because when you're drawing metal through the draw plate, both ends will be distorted. The end that you're pulling with the taper is definitely distorted, but the other end will also be. So we clip it off, file it flat, and once again I use the Swiss No. 2 cut flat hand file. Make sure you can see that nice and flat. Now we need to know the length, and the diameter, in this case, minus the thickness of the metal times 3.14, and it should give us the exact size. So (16) minus 1 is 15 times 3.14, 47.1. And if you just straighten your wire, make sure it's perfectly straight. If you're measuring on a curve, you'll actually end up longer than you want. And once again, I set my calipers. A little fiddly, but you can get there. And I always rest the point on the wooden bench peg. That way it doesn't move around. And when I get my mark, I slide my thumbnail up to it because it's easy to lose it. And while I still have my thumbnail on it, I'll cut it. It will damage your bench peg when you do this, but it really makes your life easier because your blade isn't shifting around. So now I'll measure it because I've left these. And it's just a hair long, which is perfect. So then we just gently file that. Check it. Absolutely perfect. Now we'll anneal it before we try to form it around, because it'll be work hardened from pulling it through the draw plate. So I have my wire on my charcoal block. If you use the charcoal block, use the hard block, because that way it doesn't continue glowing once you're finished. Now this is sterling, and you can see that it will turn a dark gray once we've heated it to a dull red and it's cooled. It'll be a dark gray. We don't want to use fine silver for our step because it would be too soft. So now we'll just quench it in water. Dry it. And then we'll form it just like we're going to make a ring. Half round on the inside. So manipulate this with pliers and fingers until you get it as perfect as you can. And then we'll solder it. I'm just going to hold this in my third hand. Joint up. A little bit of flux. And about a 1 millimeter long piece of hard solder. You don't need much. We could probably do this without soldering it, but it just makes it a little bit nicer. And I'm going to pick solder, so I just heat up my tungsten pick until it's red, touch the solder, it jumps into a ball, and then I can just rest it on my wire, heat it, and it immediately solders. Nice and simple. So now we'll quench it in water and pickle it. So get your square wire out of the pickle, dry it, have a look at your join, make sure it's perfect, and we'll round it up on the ring mandrel. And once again, be fairly gentle with it because it'll be easy to stretch it. So we just want to manipulate it as little as possible. Flip it over. And we want to make sure it's nice and flat. So once again, the bench blocks. And we'll just tidy up that small amount of solder. Make sure it doesn't hold it away from the bezel. Now we're going to drop our square wire inside, make sure it's the right size. It's pretty close. So I'll just lightly sand it and it should be perfect. Pick the nicest part of your bezel for the top. And what we'll do is we'll put our square wire in and push it all the way to the bottom. Lovely. So now I'll put this on my charcoal block. Flux, put bits of solder on the part where the square wire touches the inside of the bezel. We'll make sure the joints are opposite each other, and then we'll heat this, solder the square wire to the base, and that part's finished. So make sure your soldering block is nice and flat. That way the step bezel will be in the right spot. So mix up your flux. Flux your step where it touches the bezel. And I'm going to use 4 pieces of solder, hard solder. Place it with your brush so that it's sitting on the step. Now I'm using a fair amount of solder because I want to make sure that this completely fills the join. So we're just going to initially dry out the flux. Just by lightly running the flame over it. We want to dry out the flux and keep the solder in place. Take your time, there's no hurry. When the flux is nice and pasty white, it'll be dry. So I'm going to crank up the flame a little. And I'm just going to circle outside the bezel. because what I want is for the solder to flow down and not up the sides of the bezel. So the flux has gone clear. Just keep your eye on the solder. And there, the solder flowed all the way around. Lovely. So now we'll quench it and pickle it. So once we have our step bezel made, we're going to solder a little jump ring on so that we can put a bail on it. Now this is 1.5 diameter, and it's 1.2 millimeter diameter wire. So it's a really small jump ring, but it's thick. We just need one. I usually have a whole bunch of different size jump rings. That way, whenever you need one, you just have to pop one up rather than have to make one each time. So we're just going to grab this with our parallel jaw pliers, close the join, so we just wiggle it, push, so we end up with a nice tight join. Then I grab it opposite the join with my parallel jaw pliers, and file it flat. At the join. So you can see. Now when I place this against my step bezel, I'll have a nice flat to solder to. Now I'm going to file a flat on my bezel. Doesn't have to be very big. That's big enough. And that's so that I'll have two flats together so I get a really good solder join. So you can see I've just set my step bezel on my charcoal block. Once again, you make sure it's on a nice flat, clean area. Always mix up your flux. And I'm using a 2 millimeter long piece of hard solder, and the reason I'm using a piece that big is that I want a nice area of a curve, the meniscus, so that I'm sure that I have a really good join. So slowly heat the metal until your flux is dry. And you want to make sure that the solder in the jump ring stays in place. And what I'm going to do is circle from the top of the bezel because the bezel is so much thicker than a jump ring, we want to make sure that the bezel is as hot as the jump ring. We want them both to be the same temperature so that when the solder flows, it flows exactly between the two. Beautiful. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So now we'll quench it and pickle it. So now I have the bezel finished with the bail. Bail's hole marked on the back. And we're ready to set the stones. Now I'm going to hand this over to Peter Keep so that he can do the demonstration for setting the stones.